meant I had quite the work cut out for me going through my poems, making them high school appropriate. So I'm going to do my best to make this just for you guys. A little bit more about me after that. Yeah, so I have a degree in technical writing, writing rhetoric and discourse, but I hate staring at a computer screen all day. So instead, I work as a nanny for a single parent family. And on the weekends, for the last 2 years, I've been writing poetry on the spot at the London Museum. So basically, guests in the museum, I'm set up in one of the exhibits, like that. And they come up to me, they give me a prompt, and I write the poem on the typewriter, and I put it in the gift shop, and they take it home with them when they're all done. So they have a nice little free souvenir. One of the things I want to talk about later is how incredible it is what people will share with you when they think you're really listening. And the trust that strangers will give you just because you're sitting behind a typewriter and you've given them your time, which I think is one of the beauties of poetry and language. It's about connection. So a little bit about me as a poet. The first poem I ever wrote was about a snowman. It was a 4-line ABAB rhyme scheme written in the 3rd grade by language arts homework. My teacher, Ms. Cahill, who follows me on Instagram, stay in touch with your teachers. They are your first and forever hype men. They will always have your back, your English teachers, for sure. I mean, seriously, get their email addresses, get their phone numbers, stay in touch with them. They will always have a good book recommendation for whatever stage of life you're in. In fact, with Ms. Cahill, even after I left the 3rd grade, when I was in middle school, she would invite me back during National Poetry Month to read my poems to her students and to run little workshops with her class, just to show people that people are writing poetry, we're out here doing it. As a child, I became a rabid reader, checking out the maximum from my school's library each week and hiding away in my room with a book until dinner time. When I was in middle school, I continued to write. In speech team in high school, I competed all 4 years in various events, such as informative speaking, poetry, prose. Shout out to all my speechies out there. I have my little performance book. It's not black. I made it bright blue. The first original performance poem I ever wrote was about 7 minutes long. In spoken word and slam now, it's 3 minutes and you're off the stage. Don't do more than 3 minutes, you will bore people. But the first one I ever wrote was about my hair. And I had a lot less hair back then. It's been a journey. But there was something about poetry live. Poetry as performance, poetry as connection and confession. I couldn't resist it. It's temporary, it's ephemeral, it exists unless filmed, of course, just right here, right now. In the space between my words, my tone, my cadence and movement all work with the words themselves to create the poem as it exists here and now. And of course, on a page, we attempt to translate what we say into the air onto the page by using the blank space, the white space of the page. And actually, as a poet, I've really struggled to transition my stage poetry and my stage writing to the page, and I usually find myself writing for an audience, for people who are looking me right back in the eyes, rather than writing just for the page. That is to say, I have tried other art forms. I've tried painting. I've tried playing the guitar. I have an unfinished novel sitting in the cobweb corners of my Google Drive, and I have a couple sorry attempts at short stories. But poetry is not only what I move in best, but what I want to convince you is the best form of writing. The most efficient form of human expression, distilled down to its essence. No expensive instruments or lessons needed, no special tools or materials, just your voice and the words you already know pressed into meaning, bedazzled with poetic devices and patterns. With this in mind, I want to share with you one of my older poems. It's one of the pieces I used in 2018 when I won Louder Than a Bomb, the college edition. You guys have probably heard about the high school run one through YCA. It's now called Rooted in Radical. It's gone through a bit of a transformation, but back in 2018 it was called Louder Than a Bomb. I'm going to move over here. This piece is called Touch the Grass, a praise poem for the post-Y2K poet. It is about order, she thinks. The way in which you present the information is the way it will be processed. It is all a metaphor, and we just keep forgetting the language. I am stuck relearning how to write in my own tongue. Everything stands for something else. Everything made of something smaller, the walls made up of ghosts of atoms, and we are crafting, sculpting our stories out of agreed upon representation, zoomed out and in at the same time. Lose focus in order to become clear. And so, she sat and felt everything. How everything was made of something smaller. How it just keeps going on and on, even when it is unbearable. Sometimes I think that if aliens were to come down and greet us and ask what life was, I'd say uncomfortable and sweaty. I'd say, I am this body, and this body is me. But I am a nervous person, and when I say nervous, I mean I am nothing but a nervous system of electricity. There is what you are thinking, and then there is what you say. Two houses governed by the head, the heart, the same. I imagine him asking, how am I supposed to learn how to love you if you just keep leaving me? Me. I wake up every morning and ask myself, who will I fall in love with today? I smile at everyone who passes by because why? Not because we are just helping each other be born over and over, because in this life, everything feels like a poem. Because each time I breathe, it is my first time. Filling these lungs with deep, bright air. Thank you. So, when I was invited to do this, I was like, oh wow, what am I going to do with 40, 50 minutes of your time that you are so kindly giving me to carve out of your day and your studies and your learning and your friendships. And I decided that the best use of my time is to convince you all, from the bottom of my heart, that poetry, I know there's lots of forms, but poetry is the best form of writing. And everything is a poem. My little tangent that I'm going to include in here is that I want to convince you that memes are poems, because the relationship of the page to the language is what creates the meaning of the meme, in the same way that that's what a poem does. And I'm going to do this by talking about page poetry, which is what you and your teachers are learning about in school, and digital poetry, all that stuff we see on our Instagram feeds, that classic little 2-line and a picture. And then I want to share with you a little bit about stage poetry and the many, many, many ways in which to interact and engage with people in real life, sharing your words and listening to other people's stories through poetry. And third, I want to talk to you about on-demand poetry, which I do on my typewriter. People do all over the country, all over the world, making their living busking. I have several friends who don't have a day job. They just have a busking permit, and all summer they go out and they busk poetry for people, and they do events for corporations and weddings and work parties, and they make a living writing poems on their typewriter on the spot for strangers, which is a pretty incredible way to make money. And if there's time, if you'd like, you guys can give me a prompt, and I will write a poem on the spot for you guys as well. So what is poetry? This is stuff you all know. You all know this. We have rhythm, we have pattern, we have meter, verse, rhyme, alliteration, sound, simile. theme, enjambment, imagery, structure. This is the stuff you're learning about in class, but like, there's so much poetry outside of what you learned in school. And that's the kind of stuff that I want you to consider engaging with. There are lots of people who know way more than me, who have many more degrees than I do, who actually have books published, who have the authority to speak on this stuff. So before I even attempt to make a claim about what I believe is true, I'm going to share with you some thoughts from experts first, because I'm just a girl. I'm just a girl with a mic. So this is Lawrence Berlin-Yeti, and he believes that poetry is eternal graffiti, written in the heart of everyone, which is adorably cheesy. This is Alice Walker. Wait, raise your hand if you have heard about Alice Walker in any of your English classes. Anyone? Yeah? No? Okay, well she's phenomenal. You should check her out. She believes that poetry is the lifeblood of rebellion, revolution, and the raising of consciousness. So this is very much about poetry connecting to other people, not just your internal self, not just the internal narrator of your own life. June Jordan believes that poetry is a political act because it involves telling the truth. Although with a little poetic license, anything can be the truth. Robert Frost, wait, you know him, right? You know him? Yeah. He believes that poetry is a way of taking life by the throat, which is a nice little crossover of page poetry and stage poetry because it is how we speak to other people. Carl Sandburg, he's a Chicago classic. He believes that poetry is an echo, asking a shadow to dance. And then Mary Oliver, one of our great, great contemporary poets, R.I.P. to Mary Oliver. She believes that poetry is one of the ancient arts, and it begins, as did all the fine arts, within the original wilderness of the earth. So in her view, poetry is not just a person thing. It's not a personal, a humanity thing. It is within the world we walk on, the world we move through. And that's where we gather our poetry from. It's very much about the relationship of the self to the earth and the earth to the self. So I'm going to try to put myself in the halls of the greats here. And I have an own little poem that I wrote just for you guys. And I had a really hard time coming up with a title because, God forbid, I make a claim and say that I know what I'm talking about. So this one is called Poem, Trying to Define Poetry to an Audience of High Schoolers. Very nicely, given me their time. It is not off book. It is still on book because this is what we call fresh produce in spaces like this. It's brand new. I wrote it like 2 days ago. So come along for the ride with me. I'm going to switch to the other mic. Poetry is when our word choice means more than the words themselves. Poetry is connotation carved into the air. Poetry is how I archive my anxieties, make my memories into meaning. Poetry is rhyme and reason. Poetry is a beautiful way to talk about ugly things. Poetry is dusty and delicate, unless it is sharp and eviscerating. Poetry is sometimes inaccessible because not every poem can hold every story. Poetry is a chore. Poetry is not very profitable. Poetry is a license to lie honestly, to make it up as you go. Poetry is an early days Instagram filter. Poetry is when you talk to someone you love and your chest starts unwrapping. Poetry is pecking at plastic, damp in your bathrobe, clutching a shower beer because I'll be damned if I forget another good line. Poetry is trying to name life, but call it something new. Poetry is painting the same thing with different colors, and every shade is in Times New Roman. Is poetry a tool, a toy, or a talisman? Poetry is a dare. Poetry is the panopticon of your internal narrator on drugs. Oh wait, don't say that. Poetry is just a girl with a notebook. Poetry is an urgent and temporary fire. Poetry is how to survive being 17. Poetry is the way out, over, and through. I know poetry can be pretty intimidating. I know a lot of times you stare at a poem that you were assigned for class and you're like, this makes no sense. I don't know what they're talking about. It's in a whole other language. I don't understand. And I want to encourage you to think of poetry outside of just your classrooms, outside of the books. And this is a big belief that Billy Collins, who is considered America's poet, the people's poet, the working class poet of America. He was the U.S. Poet Laureate for 2 terms in the early 2000s. He has several books and awards, and he's a firm believer that poetry needs to be accessible. People need to be able to enter into it, interact with it, dive into it. And one of his great quotes that I love is, I'm a great believer in poetry out of the classroom. In public places, on subways, trains, on cocktail napkins, and I'd rather have my poems on the subway than around the seminar table at an MFA program. Which brings me to digital poetry. Please raise your hand if you get any Instagram poetry on your feed or on TikTok. Like reels where it's a dramatic shot of nature and like little pithy things on top of it. Yeah? Yeah, it's like, it's a thing. It's inescapable, honestly, and sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's not. And I mean, there's a fine line between inaccessible, accessible, and trite. And I love like stuff like Rupi Kaur's poems are incredibly accessible, a great little entryway for poetry. But I really think it's funny that I was able to put one of her little poems inside of another one because there's so much white space on the page that you can put 2 on the same thing, which I think is kind of fun. So it's like 3 lines and a little doodle, which makes me think about the interaction of words and the page and the art in which we put on the page. This is also an Instagram poem, but it's a little less accessible. You actually have to stop and read it while you're scrolling. You have to stop and actually look into it and interact with it. And then that's not really art, but just a little line, a little doodle. And this is where I want to like start wondering that fine line between poem, digital collage, meme. What could this be? A little bit of everything? What are those lines? Language is blurred, it is unclear. So this one definitely looks like a meme, definitely reads like a bad poem, but it's like a cute little picture of an orange. So which one is it? This one, definitely a meme that someone turned into a poem, which is one of my favorites. Also, little aside, this day and age, sharing memes with people is like my favorite way to connect with my friends. It's so hard sometimes to engage in a full conversation and actually like bare your soul to people. So being able to share memes with someone is this beautiful, simple way of connecting. Not to mention, this is like an entire genre of poetry distilled down into one meme. And same with this one. Me remembering how I was content to remain enduring a familiar sadness when I could have been risking only disappointment for the chance to explore endless possibilities in this life. Which is like all of Walt Whitman's collections, all of them are just this. And so at what point is poetry just these small universal feelings that we're trying to recreate over and over and over and trying to make it personal and individual and connection? Then we have stage poetry. Who here has stage fright? Can you raise your hand if you have stage fright? That's like the worst thing you can do to someone with stage fright. Okay, I see all the way in the back. I see why you're sitting back there. I had stage fright too, and then I joined the speech team and just developed an alter ego to be on stage. Right, raise your hand if you're speechy. Speechy, okay, cool, yeah, okay. I did informative speaking in high school, and I did prose, and I did poetry, which is a really great way to just learn how to connect and share language and put on a persona when you're on stage with people, which is very much poetry as well. So I want to talk about the different ways in which you can interact with poetry IRL, and I know a lot of these places might not be accessible to you because you can't go to bars yet, which is where all the good poetry happens. Sorry. But so there's readings, open mics, and slams. All of them are live poetry, but they're all very different. A reading is when someone who usually has a book, is established, is invited to come speak. They read from their book, and there's usually 2 people and a double header. And these are at bookstores, coffee shops, but it's always run by a poetry organization or an established group. An open mic happens anywhere, everywhere, at whatever crappy dive bar is down the street. You can find an open mic and do a poem, and then someone's doing a comedy bit right after you, and then there's like someone in a clown costume as well, and it's just absolute chaos. And that's just one way to share your poetry with people. And then the third one, which I think some of us are familiar with, is a slam, which is an actual competition. And this was started in the 80s by Mark Smith at the Get Me High Lounge in Chicago. It was later changed to the Green Mill. He has the longest running open mic slam performance across the country. It used to be every Sunday evening, and now it's once a month, every third Sunday. So when you turn 21, I really hope that that is still going, so you can go experience history and share your poetry in the best place to share live poetry. One of the reasons that space is so cool, too, is there's a jazz band that improvises behind you while you're reading your poem, which is pretty cool. So you have to really know your poem, because at one point they're just gonna like throw in a little jazz riff, and you have to be prepared to keep going through your poem. So they do slams, but there's also more organized slams like Louder Than a Bomb, which is now Rooted and Radical. It's been rebranded. Young Chicago Authors has gone through a bit of a transformation. And then there's button poetry. I assume almost everyone has seen a button poetry poem in their English class, because it's the only way to... There's not a whole lot of high school accessible slam poems, and button poetry is God's gift to English teachers, to be able to share slam with young people in a way that allows them to not get in trouble by their parents at home. Raise your hand if you have watched a button poetry video in your English class. Neil Hilborn, Sarah Kay, Sarah Benamy, yeah? Okay, cool. I'm actually going to be going up to Minneapolis in April to compete in one of Button Poetry's slams. It's strange, normally in slams you're on a team of about 4 to 5 people. Weird poetry as a competition and then poetry as a team sport, like how does that even happen? And I'm going to be competing as an indie on a team with total strangers. So we'll see how that goes. I'm just going to come in with my poems and I'll be ready. It's very much something you win for brownie points, not really something that you win money for. As I said in that poem, poetry is not very profitable. Definitely need a day job. Or a spouse with insurance. So yeah, these are some of the ways in which you can interact with slam poetry if you're curious and you like winning, but you like words. This is hard to find that crossover. So we have Louder Than a Bomb, which they made a documentary on the origins of Louder Than a Bomb in the 90s in Chicago, because Chicago is a huge, huge poetry scene. So we have button poetry, MBS, and Louder Than a Bomb. This, I know you can't really read it, you can't probably go to most of them, they're all in bars anyway, but Chicago has a huge poetry scene. There are literally like 20 events in 1 month. Workshops, open mics, slams, readings, collaborative spaces, and like poetry is everywhere. It's not hard to find ways in which to interact with it. So if you have any interest in poetry, I'll have some links and accounts for you to follow at the end if you want to get engaged or interact with local poetry. There are spaces for young people as well, such as the Poetry Foundation, the Chicago Poetry Center, and Young Chicago Authors, which is now Rooted and Radical, and 826 Shy, which does short stories and essays in addition to poetry. So I want to talk next about on-demand poetry. Has anyone actually used a typewriter before? Yeah? Okay, cool. So, should I pick it up and hold it for you guys so you can see what I'm looking for? is from 1962. I got it in a thrift store with the case still locked with the original receipt and brush set and everything, with the signature from the original person who bought it. I got that for $5. It's worth like $450. There's something so beautifully temporary about typewriter poetry. It is something that you do, you create it together. You create it on the spot. They walk away with it, and you rarely ever see that poem again. You may never interact with that poem again either. And actually, do you see the person in the blue dress with the big flower in her hair? That is one of my friends who performs at the Green Mill all the time. She does typewriter poetry as well and performance poetry. She has gigs where she's contracted at Wrigley Field when they do events in their Gallagher Way space. She's paid and hired to just do poems on the spot for people. These are the parts. Does anyone know why our computer keyboards are set up the way they are? I see you, yeah?
They're set up that way because the typewriters were originally set up that way to avoid the hammers locking and breaking the typewriter.
Exactly, yeah.
Pretty sure that that's false.
Yeah, you think that's false?
I read one. It's confusing, and
Well, it's pretty cool, like how the history of the tools we use to create language impact the way we make language. Absolutely. So the hammers on the keyboard. The way we have our keyboard set up is not A, B, C, D, E, F, G all the way across, because the letters that we use are often next to each other. And so on a typewriter, when you hit the button, the hammer goes and it hits the page and it comes back. Okay. So it hits the page and it comes up, and if you have your hammers next to each other, they're going to come and hit at the same time, and they're going to get crossed, and they're going to get stuck and jammed, and then you got to pull them back, and then you're going to get ink on your fingers. So we have keyboards set up in that structure. Those keyboards are laid out like that, so those letters don't get stuck. But then that was transferred over to computers. So it's pretty cool how like the way we use language impacts the tools we make to create and distribute language. There are lots of different parts. I don't even know all the parts on my typewriter. I'm pretty simple with it. I don't get too complicated. This is the typewriter that we have at the Wonder Museum. It's from Amazon. It fell apart the second week. It has multiple letters missing. And then one of my co-poets helped me find some other typewriters to use at the museum. So it's pretty interesting when you walk in. Has anyone been to the Wonder Museum? Yeah? Okay, cool. It's all digital, right? Everything's digital, it's all interactive. And the weirdest part about having a typewriter and being a typewriter poet in that space is I am the only analog exhibit in the room. Everything else, you have to press a button, there's a light, there's some boop-de-boops, there's electricity, and with me, it's just me, connection, and the keyboard. And people really get a kick out of it, especially when grandparents are there, and they have like really small kids with them. They're like, oh my God, I used to use one of these. And then they're trying to like have their kids with their sticky fingers use my vintage typewriter. And I'm like, please don't. I want to share with you some of the poems that I've written there that are kind of fun. And people get really caught off guard when it comes to on-demand poetry if it's not something they've interacted with regularly. And one of my favorite parts about being a typewriter poet is that I'm not writing about myself. I'm writing about what that person is giving me. And it's this connection that we create together. And I get to pull in what I know, I get to pull in my poetic devices, but it's really whatever they ask of me to put on that page. And so I had a very large bachelorette party come in. They had clearly just had a boozy brunch, and they wanted a poem about Taylor Swift and clouds and the garden. So this is what they walked out with. Our song is a default iPhone notification buzzing in my back pocket while I'm at work and you're texting me back too slow. Our song is the way you laugh, getting caught in the rain, kissing me in the garden between the roses, where I said yes, and you asked if I could say it again. I was holding your hand, my head in the clouds, grabbed a pen, and wrote my vows. And I would have never written this. I would have absolutely never written this. unless I had this connection with this stranger who had something on her mind, something going on in her life, and she wanted a poem for it. And she actually reached out to me on Instagram later and said that she showed it to her fiance, and they read it and they read it. And that's the kind of connection that you can make with poetry, just by listening, just by giving someone the time to share with you. And of course, you get a Taylor Swift poem. I get a lot of birthday poems at the museum because a lot of people come there to celebrate birthdays or anniversaries, things like that. After the first year or so, I will admit I developed a template for birthday poems. Some of the lines were recycled, some of them were repeated. There's only so many ways you could wish someone a happy birthday. That's why we have one happy birthday song. This is one of the more recent ones that I did that I don't think it is a template. Actually, she was a really cool person, so she gave me everything I needed. And she asked for a birthday poem about good vibes only. Buttercream frosting, sunrise flicker like the candle on your birthday cake. Make a wish on the flame you orbit the sphere around. I wish you good food and better company, gathered around to shower you in compliments, angel, queen, goddess. Good vibes and like minds only on your birthday weekend. So the birthday ones are fun, and yeah, people are usually coming in after a boozy brunch because it's in West Loop. So there's a lot of restaurants, a lot of party atmosphere, and then people come to the Wonder Museum and they're usually pretty surprised to see me with a typewriter. I really love this one. I had a great connection with this gentleman who was traveling by himself, just wanted to visit Chicago for a long weekend. And we just kind of talked about his work, and he let me know that he's an artist too. And I was like, what's your art? What's your medium? And he said he's a musician and does sound engineering. And that's all I needed. You know, sometimes they just give you exactly what you need to write the poem. I call this one Alchemy in the Air. My first word was listen. Now my fingers form sound from bent air, turn loose waves into music. And by that, I mean magic. I open my palms to the naked piano and pull the lacquered teeth until they sing. And that one, he actually shared on his Instagram later, which is pretty cool. Also, working at the Wonder Museum was the best way to get new Instagram followers. Because you just put your little handle at the bottom, and they all interact with it. I just recently started getting my nails done. I'm a nails girly now. I have my tribute to my high school emo self. I have my black glitter nails this week. It's like, well, go back to high school. Might as well go back to high school with my nails. I was listening to My Chemical Romance on the way here. Like a good elder emo. I had a really hard time writing this one because this woman came to me and she just started a small business as a nail tech entrepreneur. She had started this convention called NailCon, and she was really struggling with it, and I knew nothing about nails at the time. So I'm like pulling up my phone, like what are the different kinds of like manicures and blah, blah, blah. And it was an exercise in thinking on my feet, and then using what I know about poetic devices to create something out of something I don't understand. Okay. Girl, you look like you need a minute to breathe, a manicure to cure your ills, file away the frills of your anxiety. Girl, do you want press-ons, acrylic, paraffin, or dip? Soft gel, hard gel, or gradient? Girl, if you don't want to shell out, you can get a shellac. But either way, lean back. Give me your hands, get your nails done, and relax. And she later messaged me on Instagram and said that she framed this and put it up in her new nail salon. I never anticipated being able to connect with strangers like this with my poetry, and I've kind of always felt a bit narcissistic, staring into the mirror, the pool of Narcissus, and this has really helped me branch out from writing just about myself, but to connect with other people and make poetry accessible to anyone and everyone. You really have to have rage to do typewriter poetry, because you are interacting with the public literally anyone and everyone. And it is incredible what people will share with you. Like this next poem, I had this dad who came in, and he didn't really share much about the background of the story with me, and I asked him what he wanted the poem about, and he says, how I would do anything to get the love of my son back. Which is an insane thing to share with someone you just met, let alone an insane thing to ask me to write a poem about. I don't know him, I don't know his child, I don't know the relationship, and yet I'm asked to create this piece of art for him. And this is what I wrote for him. Billy was his son's name. I am the shards of a broken dinner plate, sharp in your two young hands, shattered, yes, but yet learning to heal, yearning to put our pieces whole. I will mix and cure my own glue, if only to once again be the best man I can, the best dad I can offer to you. When I write the poems, I don't write them right in front of people. They come in, I'm in one of the early exhibits in the museum, we engage, we interact, I write down their prompt and their name, and they move on through the museum, and I write it while they're looking at the exhibits. When I'm done, I hang it up in the gift shop, and they take it home with them. Luckily, from where I'm sitting at my little podium with my typewriter, I can see into the gift shop right when they get their poems, so I get to see them read it and witness them witness themselves. And a lot of times they'll come back through. I've had people come cry and give me hugs. I've gotten $100 tips for poems before. I've had mothers who were dropping off their kids at college fall into my arms because I happen to go to the same university that their child is going to. And they're scared, but they see that I'm still here, so their son is going to be okay. And it's just this wall drops when poetry becomes interactive, when it becomes a connection, and it's something you create together. At the same time, when you're working with the public, you also get 6-year-olds who want poems about puppies and summer break, or an 8-year-old who wanted a poem about penguins and friendship. So literally, I write this poem about a dad who's struggling to reconnect his family, and then 3 minutes later, I have to write a poem about penguins. The emotional whiplash.
All this reminds me of is that time where people would put 20 kids in AI generator.
Yeah.
Image generators like that.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for the museum to put in an AI machine to replace me for sure. But people like the typewriter, they like the
It's
analog.
getting worse, but every day it's reading up stuff.
Do we want more wonder poems or do we want a slam poem? Slam? Can we take that down off the screen, please? Can we take the, can I do that? This is a poem that I've been working on for 6 effing years. I swear, 6 years. And it finally came together for this presentation. It has been edited, it has been reworked, it has been nonstop. Not quite done. It's called Love Languages. Because we have poetry, I can turn our first words into an ode to good timing. I can turn our love into sonnets, beats like iambic rhyme schemes and stanzas. Because we have poetry, I can explain what it means to love empty-handed, to fall flat through arms that swore to catch me. Because we have poetry, I can peel back my body and hand you the bones with which to pick me apart. 2, I want pork